Atlas Fallen is all about the combat, and there are some key tips you're going to want to know to get the most out of this game. Just to put together your build, you need to consider weapons, armor, perks, essence stones, and idols. Not to mention there's a number of mechanics you'll need to master when actually fighting enemies. We'll cover all of that. Plus, stick around to the end for my overall thoughts on the game and recommendations on who should play it. Let's start with your 3 weapon options, the Sandwhip, Dunecleaver, and Knuckledust. Each has their strengths and weaknesses, and you'll need to choose a primary and a secondary. Any pair is totally viable, but I think the Sandwhip stands out as the most useful because it has the most range and, even more importantly, the most momentum gain. Momentum is a core combat mechanic represented by this blue bar. You build up momentum as you hit enemies, and it's used to fuel the powerful Shatter ability, as well as special attacks and passive abilities from Essence Stones, which we'll talk more about in a minute. So it's really important to build up momentum, and the Sandwhip is the best weapon for doing that. However, it's the worst for dealing damage. The Knuckledust deals the most impact damage and has the fastest attack speed, but I personally don't like its short range, so I use the Dunecleaver as my secondary. The Dunecleaver is slower, but can deal a lot of damage when using its hammer attacks. You can see how to trigger those as well as all the other attacks for any weapon by opening the combat moves menu. Armor is also an important part of your build, and similar to God of War, your armor's power level relative to the enemies matters. If an enemy's level is higher than your own, then the fight is going to be noticeably tougher, so you want to upgrade your armor as high as you can. Every armor has 5 regular stats, an additional stat bonus, which is unlocked by equipping the required essence stones, and a trait, which unlocks once you've fully upgraded the armor. Every armor upgrade also provides a perk token, which are used to unlock perks or passive skills that give you a boost. I like this system because even once you move on to a new armor, you get to keep the perk tokens from upgrading your old set, so it feels like upgrading was worth it. However, upgrading requires Essence Dust, which is the most valuable currency in the game. Unfortunately, Essence Dust is relatively hard to come by, and it's used for a lot of things, not just upgrading armor, so you do want to be somewhat careful when choosing which armors to upgrade. Once you raise the gate in Castrum 7 as part of an early main quest, you'll be rewarded with armor that's a decent upgrade over the default set. But you can get even better armor, the Scout set, earlier, which I would definitely recommend. Head over here on the map to the Shattered Keep and complete the History of the Shattered Keep quest for Lecter. You'll just have to find some clues and fight a few low-level enemies at the end, which is totally worth it to get this armor early. Keep in mind, if you don't like the look of a particular armor, you can customize it with dyes, add a cosmetic item, or even use the transmog slot to make it look like any other armor you own. You can also turn off the helmet by pressing your right stick. Let's take a look at those perks I mentioned before, which are unlocked with tokens from upgrading armor. Perks each cost 1 token to unlock at an anvil, and some can be upgraded up to 3 times to enhance their effect. It's super nice you can reset perks at any time to respec your tokens. However, you won't have a lot of extra tokens to play with until later in the game, and there's a few key perks you're going to want to pick up as soon as possible. You'll want to work your way towards Extended Charge all the way in the lower right corner, but on the way there, I recommend you pick up Quick Growth and Lucky Spotter. Both will help you get a little more Essence Dust, and Lucky Spotter will also help you get rare plants, which you'll need later on. From there, I go for Refresh and Active Parry, but until you have 3 points to get all the way to Extended Charge, I'd recommend investing them in Quick Growth to build up your Essence Dust even faster. Once you've got 3 points, you can reallocate to unlock Extended Charge, and then start reinvesting future tokens in Quick Growth and even Lucky Spotter again. After that, you can pretty much do whatever you want. By the way guys, if you're finding these tips helpful, leaving a like really does help me out and would be much appreciated. Now, we already mentioned Essence Dust is required for upgrading armor, but it's also used to unlock more gauntlet slots and craft and upgrade Essence Stones that go in those slots. Essence Stones are the most interesting and customizable part of your build, and they're key for creating your personal playstyle and becoming more powerful. There's literally something like 150 of them in the game, and there's 2 major types, the diamond-shaped active stones and the passive square ones. Active and passive stones can be one of 6 categories indicated by their color. Stones are also ranked into one of 3 tiers, with a bronze, silver, or gold outline. Bronze stones can only go in the tier 1 slots on the gauntlet. Silver ones can only go in tier 2, and gold ones can only go in tier 3. You don't need to worry about this too much though, since the compatible slots will be automatically highlighted when hovering over a particular stone. Keep in mind you can sort your essence stones a few different ways by clicking the right stick. You'll get essence stones by completing quests, looting chests, and killing enough of each type of wraith. It's definitely worth going into the journey tab and looking through the bestiary entries to see which essence stones can be obtained from each each wraith, as some of them are quite good. Sometimes, instead of getting the stone itself, you'll get a formula for fusing one, which shows up as semi-transparent in the menu. You'll need the required plants and ore to fuse a stone. These are relatively easy to find by opening the map, dropping down the map legend, and then hitting the filter button to bring up icons for each type of plant, and then again to bring up wraith sites, which will display the minerals the particular wraith yields. But to fuse a stone, you'll also need an essence core, and these are pretty hard to get, so don't use them lightly. I have 2 tips for getting essence cores. First, when collecting shards for the gauntlet, there will be extras you don't need, but if you go get them, they'll be converted into an essence core, so it's definitely worth grabbing those. Second, you can get essence cores as a drop from greater and colossal wraiths. The easiest ones to farm are divers, and a good trick for them, which the game will tell you on the loading screen tips, is to jump and use your slam attack on the orange circle while they're underground to pop them out and instantly crystallize them. Keep in mind essence stones can also be upgraded, but again, the essence dust required to do so is precious, so I would wait on upgrading stones until later once you've settled on some you really like. Now, the essence stones you choose will of course depend on your playstyle, but let me give you some early game tier 1 and 2 recommendations. I'll put the locations for all of these stones down in the description. For your tier 1 active, Dazzling Impact is solid as it allows you to interrupt enemy attacks. I like to save this one to use right before an enemy does their specific attack to summon lesser wraiths to prevent them from summoning. Tenacious Parry is a great passive that increases the duration of your Sandskin, which will help you parry more easily. Assailing Hive automatically fires a burst of target-seeking projectiles every 7 seconds, which helps with crowd control and provides some passive damage. And Unstable Generation is great to help build up momentum faster. For tier 2 early on, I like Biting Sandstorm as my active. It lets you release a tornado that tracks and damages enemies. Again, useful for crowd control and passive damage. Roaring Shatter increases the damage from the Shatter attack, which I often use when the momentum gauge is in the tier 2 zone, so I like to put this one first so it activates quickly when the momentum bar starts filling zone 2. Fractured Field is another good one for crowd control and passive damage as it causes the slam attack to leave behind a damaging zone. And finally, I think Impetuous Retribution is nice for dealing some damage back to enemies when you get hit. The final part of your build is the Idol, which builds up its meter as you deal damage similar to the momentum gauge and then allows you to heal by consuming charges. A good early idol is the Idol of Time, which you can get from Lightbow at the Desert Moose Pond after clearing the first watchtower. The Idol of Time heals you more than other idols, with the trade-off being that it heals over a short period of time as opposed to instantly, which I think is a small compromise. You should definitely clear that watchtower, by the way. It gives some good loot in addition to unlocking this idol, and it's not too challenging. Okay, we've covered all aspects of your build, so now let's talk actual combat tips. Parrying with the Sandskin is super important to crystallize enemies and control the pace of the fight. You'll be able to parry an attack anytime it's telegraphed with a red flash. This sounds simple, but I personally found that I was often getting thrown off by the enemy's attack animation even though I was paying attention to the red flashes. In many cases, the attack animation makes it look like you should parry later than you actually should. I learned pretty quickly that you really just need to focus on those red flashes. Trigger the Sandskin the moment you see them and try not to pay attention to the enemy's movements or where they are in relation to you. It sounds weird, and I wish the animations were better aligned with the red flash, but that really is the best way to nail a parry. A successful parry will crystallize lesser wraiths, freezing them for a moment and making them more susceptible to damage. A successful string of parries will do the same to larger wraiths. Not all attacks can be parried though. As the game will teach you, attacks telegraphed with blue flashes are not parryable and have to be dodged. These attacks will also drain your momentum in addition to dealing a lot of damage, so it's important to get clear of them. In addition to a regular dodge, jumping up and air dashing is also a good way to avoid many of these blue attacks. It's also important not to spam your attacks. You'll need to learn the attack patterns of the enemies and time your attacks carefully. It's easy to get carried away doing a string of attacks and open yourself up to taking unnecessary damage. Try to be strategic and use the mobility of sand surfing, jumping, and air dashing to jump in for a few hits and then back out to safety. The Sandwhip's hook attack is also great for mobility as it will pull you towards an enemy and can be used for zipping around between aerial enemies. You always want to prioritize building momentum with the Sandwhip to activate your abilities and get access to shatters. And it's also important to prioritize parrying when you know an enemy is going to give you a string of attacks that will allow you to crystallize them. Larger wraiths will almost always summon smaller ones, and they'll often be stingers. It's worth finding some of these early to practice on in isolation so you're comfortable dealing with them in more challenging fights. There's some near the desert camp you can get to pretty easily. Keep in mind, killing the larger wraith will also kill all the lesser wraiths it summoned, so if a large wraith is close to dying, focus on finishing them and don't worry about the others. This is a bit more advanced, but it's worth knowing that you can quick swap up to 3 different gauntlet builds mid-combat. You just need to hold down your action toggle button and hit left or right on the D-pad. This will swap your essence stones, weapons, and idols. There's also some settings you may want to adjust. The most important one is controller remapping. You can customize the controls as much as you'd like, which I really appreciate. Under gameplay settings, you can also adjust how often Niall gives you hints in case he's getting annoying. Right under that, you might consider toggling on the photo mode shortcut if you'd like to use photo mode. And in display and graphics, there's a slider for motion blur, so if you're like me and you don't like motion blur, you can turn that off. So this video isn't a review, but I know some of you are interested in what I think of the game, so let me give you like a 60-second overview of my thoughts and recommendation on who should play Atlas Fallen. First, the combat is fun. The combination of mobility, verticality, gear, perks, and so many essence stones to create builds with does make it satisfyingly complex. Sometimes the combat is a little frustrating, like with that parry timing I mentioned, but it can certainly be mastered. I've also enjoyed exploring the map, especially since you can get around so quickly using sand surfing and fast travel between anvils. I do wish there were more green areas and vegetation. I get they were going for the whole shattered world thing, and a desert environment is pretty cool, but contrasting that with something like lush oases scattered around would have been really nice. Still, I've enjoyed exploring, and the important thing is, even though it's a lot of desert and rock, the map doesn't feel totally empty. There aren't a bunch of NPCs or settlements, but there are enough wraith sites, environmental puzzles, treasures, and ruins to explore. They also included a bunch of cool quality of life features, like the ability to customize your character and armor, the build presets and quick swapping, and even little things like an option to clear all notifications in the menu. The graphics aren't incredible, I'd say they're pretty average, but they're serviceable. But the biggest areas where Atlas Fallen is lacking is story and characters. This game does not have a strong narrative or character development. It feels like they wrote a story simply because they needed one, but they didn't really have a compelling story to tell. But I think they probably knew that. I think Deck 13 set out to make a fun and unique combat system, which they did, and they knew they weren't going to have an amazing story. Sure, I would have loved for it to have a deeper, really well-written story and more complex characters. But if the narrative wasn't going to get the resources it needed to be really good, I'd rather have this basic story as opposed to an awkward attempt at something more grand. Overall, if you're looking for a captivating story with characters you can connect with, Atlas is not for you. But if you want an action game with a fun, unique combat system, lots of room to experiment with different builds, and some cool enemies to take on, then I think you'll like it. Now, if you are looking for something with a strong story and characters, but still a challenging combat system, then I highly recommend Kena Bridge of Spirits. I'll link my review for that down below. But if you're diving into Atlas Fallen, then I hope you found these tips helpful. If you did, leaving a like would be much appreciated. Thanks to Focus Entertainment and Deck 13 for hooking me up with a review copy of the game, and shout out to my friend Arg who joined me in early access to dig up all these tips for you guys. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.